city. Earth has been overrun by an incurable virus. All attempts to contain the disease have failed, and the wealthy and powerful flee the planet in search of a new start. On board are 10,000 citizens, all secured in deep stasis and watched over by a team of loyal androids. Stasis, a technology still not fully tested, has in some rare cases led to permanent psychological damage due to the onset of nightmares from which they cannot awaken. This citizen finds himself in the Whitechapel district of London in 1888. This area became infamous for being the hunting ground of Jack the Ripper, who over the course of just over 2 months was believed to have abducted and brutally murdered 5 young women. In some cases, the victims were so horrifically mutilated that it took extensive legwork by the police to be able to identify the bodies. After the first 3 deaths, word had spread all over London's East End, and the women who worked the streets at night were faced with the horrific reality that the very thing they were forced to do in order to survive was the very same thing that exposed them to the killer and a violent, untimely death. The whole district was on high alert, and even though there was an increased police presence in the area, the murders would continue. Our citizen in stasis, believing he is an inspector tasked with finding the culprit behind the murders, sits in a local pub having his supper, when out of the corner of his eye, he notices something very strange indeed. His table was positioned at the rear of the room, giving him a clear view towards the kitchen beyond. The view of the filthy kitchen was a sight he could tolerate. However, it wasn't until he saw the enormous tail of a rodent that his stomach truly turned. Disgusted, he stood up from his table, drew his truncheon, and crept as silently as he could toward the filthy animal. His plan to smash it over the head halted as he realized he wasn't looking at a wild creature. He was in fact staring at a fully clothed humanoid rat that was rapidly filling a bag with scraps. "Oi!" he shouted, and the rat-like creature, startled, turned and hissed at the inspector before rapidly disappearing into the pile of trash. The inspector was frozen where he stood, questioning what he had just seen. Was he going insane? He exited the pub and walked to the rear of the building, finding no trace of the rat man, only more trash and more places for it to hide. On his way home, he passed by several ladies of the night, warning them all not to be there when he came back. They told him they knew the risks, but what choice did they have? To get off the street, they had to work the streets. They felt they had a better chance of fighting off or avoiding a psychopath than they did the cold or starvation. He walked away, leaving them to their fate, not having dared tell them of what else might be lurking out there, for fear of being labelled a madman himself. The next day he inquired at several taverns and restaurants, inspecting their kitchens and alleyways, asking the question about trouble with rats, to which they all laughed and said, "This is London, you know. Rats are everywhere." None of them spoke of seeing what he had witnessed though. However, he didn't prompt any of them to do so, for fear of being mocked even further. Exactly a week later, after yet another battered and mutilated body had been reported, he saw it again. While smoking his pipe in a gaslit alley, he saw the shadow of what he was certain was the Rat Man. He extinguished his pipe and then made his way down the stone terrace, the light behind him fading and the road ahead stretching deeper into the darkness. His eyes slowly adjusting, he was able to make out the Rat Man's shape again, heading down some stairs at the base of a building, down into the cellar below. He cautiously moved onward. With his baton in his hand, he made his way down the stairs and peered into the keyhole of the door. Even though the scene before him was shocking and bizarre, he was convinced his eyes weren't playing tricks on him this time. There was a young lady lying on the floor. The Rat Man was closing in on her. The inspector was certain he had found his culprit. He burst into the room, and to his surprise, the Rat Man wasn't doing anything untoward with the young lady. He was actually feeding her the scrap food. It appeared he was helping her. The startled Rat Man hissed at the inspector and then disappeared into a large crack in the wall. The inspector, not seeing the need to go after him, then moved in closer to the semi-conscious lady and asked her if she was all right. Her eyes had rolled back into her head as she looked up at him and gave out a blood-curdling moan just as the sheet on her back shifted around like a pot about to boil. He then knew that things here were not right, and he was overwhelmed with a sinking feeling that they were about to get even worse. The inspector pulled back the sheet and revealed dozens of baby rats all over her body, all suckling at her flesh, drawing nutrients from her blood. As he reeled back, the door to the cellar burst open and a huge figure with glowing red eyes moved in on him. Every ounce of his being became saturated with fear, and he was unable to override his instinct to turn and run. Run as fast as he could, off into the night. Back on the ship, the android medics had been alerted to the citizens' irregular brainwaves and were monitoring them to ensure they didn't reach dangerous levels. What was of more concern, though, was the other alert they had received from another citizen in the same group of pods. The medic stood and watched the monitor in silence, trying to make sense of the anomaly. It appeared that somehow this woman had suddenly fallen pregnant. While a wry smile went undetected on the face of a citizen right next to her.